Is Dimir midrange the best deck in Standard? Can anyone topple the king?
Comment below with your thoughts as we navigate through this week's metagame shifts. Now let's untap.
Welcome everybody to the MTG Rebellion State of the Meta. I'm Max Damage, and today we're going to walk through Week 12 of the Standard metagame as we get closer to Wilds of Eldraine.
And I'm Darth Rictus of the Darkstream. Let's dive into Tier 1 to get started. So Azorius Control is back at the top, proving that there is in fact a path through that wall of Dimir Aggro you've been seeing in Mythic lately. The other four archetypes are no surprise, as they've been here for a few weeks now. We'll cover them individually in a moment, but for now, let's push on to Tier 2.
Orzhov Control is back into Tier 2 land after an impressive third-place finish in MTGO Challenge this past weekend. Now, while the build we saw was more mid-range than outright control, it can be said that the two share enough elements that we can leave them as is for the moment.
Azorius Soldiers also sneaks back into Tier 2 after a second-place finish in an MTGO Challenge. We're seeing kind of a grinder build this week with a full playset of Knight Errant of Eos to complement 4 wedding announcements in the main board. Apparently, it's time to just go wide around all that removal from Dimir and other mid-range decks, and honestly, I'm here for it.
Tracking another one of my favorite lists, Domain actually falls to Tier 2 after a brief return to the top, finishing in 9th place at the MTGO Showcase. This deck continues to grind, but hasn't found a trophy in a while. Don't be surprised if it falls even further next week at this rate.
And moving on to Tier 3, no real surprises here. There are variations on Mono Red that I've seen sneaking around Mythic, but nothing that's put together a trophy, nothing that's put together a tournament result, or even a top 8, really. So we'll leave that be and move on to our Tier 1 breakdowns. Let's get started with Azorius Control.
Let's go.
So this little number took down an MTGO challenge over the weekend, proving that a blue splash might just be stronger than a black one in this base white control build. While the splash itself is quite minor, don't sleep on how strong having 6 hard counters in the sideboard is for decks like Domain or just the Mirror Match that are just looking to go over the top, right? Now, Invasion of New Phyrexia ain't too shabby either, and I'll never stop loving that Miser's copy of Teferi, Temporal Pilgrim. Most importantly, when you see these inbred Dimir metagames like we've seen lately with main board Swords of Once and Future, you just know that these white value engines are ready to churn through, just as it used to against Mono Black half a year ago. That same kind of logic is just, it's just rolling. It's still good. Wedding Announcement is still a common sideboard option, and in this case, we're seeing it in the main, which tells you we're positioned well for Dimir already.
Yeah, we're starting to see this mono white mid-range shell start to take over quite a few different archetypes that are adjacent, such as Orzhov, such as Esper, Azorius as well. So I'm not surprised to see Azorius Control bust through, considering all of the aggressive strategies that have been happening lately, and it's just kind of been lurking, waiting. And we're at late stage meta phase right now, so it's this is where control decks are very strong, very potent, because they know what they have to counter. What are your predictions for the coming weeks regarding control decks in particular? Do you think this is going to continue to be a thing, or do you think they will take a step back as we see set release occur?
You know, I think we're going to see Control do just fine until Wilds drops, which gives us, one more weekend? 2 at most, before Wilds has hit the mainstream. So I expect to see a fair amount of Control. We have an established meta. Everybody knows where we're trying to go, what we're trying to do at this point, which means Control's at its all-time highest potential, right? Because it can sit there and go, what do we need to win these margin calls all across the meta, right? That said, once a new set drops, and it's especially since it's Eldraine, and if everybody remembers, the last time Eldraine was in the picture, it kind of broke standard. So I think we're all expecting to have things shaken up a little bit. And yeah, Control, not usually a great call for week 1 of a new meta.
Exactly. Now talk to us about this next deck here that very predictably typically wants to curve out. Is there anything new for Esper Legends?
The MTGO Showcase featured an Esper Legends variant, taking down the trophy with one of the most unique blends I've yet seen. Instead of pushing all those powerful legends all over the place, this build opted for a go-wide scenario that was prepped to win a war of attrition. So let's be clear, there are tension points in this build. Any deck with Wedding Announcement and Depopulate in the same main board has to acknowledge this. That said, I can imagine that opponents were caught mistaking their position on board frequently due to this, allowing that Esper Rafine pilot to gain quite a few margin points each game. So there's a difficulty in trying to combat a deck that has individual creatures that you must answer, such as Fairy Mastermind right here, and Rafines. I mean, these are cards that just have to get answered on impact, or else they hamper your ability to interact, and they allow more options for the pilot, right? But there's also a bunch of creatures that need very specific solutions, like Dennick, Edgar, Charmed Groom, and Ao. These aren't easy things to answer. You need exile effects, you don't need destroy effects. But you also need to handle the other stuff too. So you're seeing this plethora, this diversification of threats, and it's very difficult for other decks to deal with that, and it's all on curve, all within these 3 colors. And that doesn't even bring into the fact that we have counter spells, we have removal spells, and we have Army and Cans via Wedding Announcement, Wandering Emperor. Not to mention the sideboard allows you to slant into walkers and counters for control and ramp, or additional removal for aggro archetypes. My opinion, this is one of the coolest lists. It's truly inspired. It was piloted by somebody named Prophet of Fire, which to me seems pretty apt.
I do like that name. Oh man, this deck typically sees 3 or 4 copies main board of Sheldred. We're starting to see some versatility here. We're starting to see some adaptability from this deck with cards like Wandering Emperor, cards like Ao, cards like Edgar Charm Groom, which, you know, not only is it a must respond, but when you respond to it, it has that recursive ability to come back and give you even more value. So talk to us about that. When did this deck shed the easy answers for, you know, because it used to be you could just 1-for-1 all the way up the curve against Esper Legends? Is that the case anymore? What's going on?
I mean, this really is less of a Legends deck and more of an Esper mid-range deck. It has some of the key Legends. Most notably, it has Rafine, and that has always been the backbone of these Esper Legends decks. But you'll notice there's only 1 Plaza of Heroes in this deck. This is really more of an Esper mid-range build, and it's just beautifully constructed. Like, every time I look at this, I think, what a masterpiece. Because how do you answer this? You know what I mean? Like, you can't just play go for the throats and hit them up the curve. You can't play clean answers. So much of this is 2-for-1 card advantage. So much of this are sticky threats. And then you just have powerhouses, if they're not sticky, with Fairy Mastermind saying, deal with me or you don't get to draw extra cards without me also drawing cards. Rafine giving you just tons of advantage while being a creature with ward, not easy to deal with. I love this deck. This is so well put together. I'm going to play test the shit out of this in the next week. I promise you.
Yeah, well deserved. This deck deserves some attention because I think it's evolved way past its unga bunga. Let me just play, you know, the 1, 2, 3 drops, curve out and win. Like, it requires a little bit more thought, and I think there's something to be said for that. Now, this next archetype, very similarly, tries to mitigate specific decks. Talk to us about Esper Control and what it's trying to do on ladder.
Well, Max, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And that continues to be the motto of Esper Control players, as this list placed 2nd in the MTGO Showcase Challenge while placing another copy into the top 8. 4 Wedding Announcements in the sideboard is a bit unusual, but otherwise this falls right into the typical builds we've seen, with perhaps less of an emphasis on counterspells post-board, but far more mitigation aimed at Dimir, as shown with those Wedding Announcements and the Chrome Host Seed Sharks. This is very much a rise and grind kind of archetype, and I like where they've been positioning this and what they're trying to do with it. It's not an intuitive list. It never has been. I can see how this fell to the other Esper deck because, I mean, look at what you're trying to do here with Sunfalls, Farewells. Can you imagine trying to like navigate around counterspells and Fairy Mastermind, but also Edgar, but also Emperor, but also Wedding Announcement? Like, the Shieldred might have actually just been the weakness that nobody was willing to acknowledge before in these Esper mid-range lists, and Dimir saying, okay, we're just like, Shieldred is it. You know, that's the game plan. I don't know that it is anymore. And for everybody who called for banning, and I was one of them, we might have been wrong, because we're starting to see that you don't need Shelly to win with black as one of your base colors.
Right. Yeah, the idea of Shelly being a sacred cow in standard right now is gone. In my opinion, evidence for that is also Mono Black Aggro's position in Tier 3 and how it's kind of been sitting there for a while. I think you're right. Perhaps the insistence on that, that 4-drop bomb really hurt a lot of these decks. So I'm honestly not surprised to see that happen.
It's a linchpin card, but it might be the
Mhm.
wrong one in a format filled with go for the throat. You know what I mean? Like you don't want
Yeah.
your 4 mana spell to be answered by 2 mana. You don't want to trade down on mana advantage. And Shelly screams, "Answer me or die!" But if you answer me and you answer me efficiently, that was the curve out. That was the plan. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely, especially against decks that snowball. You got to think about how to mitigate. So, talk to us about Selesnya Enchantress, a deck that's known to snowball very quickly.
All right, so same week, different results. Selesnya Enchantress sticks at the top, placing 2 copies into the top 8 of the MTGO Showcase Challenge while proving how difficult it is for Dimir to contain the grindy nature of this mid-range build. Now, this is a little bit outside the norm. It shaves a copy of Generous Visitor and Hallowed Haunting to position a copy of Borrowed Time in the main, along with a third copy of Rite of Harmony. And while I'm not really sure I agree with how they've positioned it, results do tell the tale. And this placed higher than any Dimir players, letting you know that it came to fucking feast when it comes to a Dimir meta. And this is absolutely a deck that you look at and you say, okay, there's wedding announcements in the main. Again, every time I see that, all I can think of is imagine how shitty Lily of the Veil just got for Dimir. Imagine how
Yeah.
rough it is to just battle through that raw advantage that you're going to get with 3 creatures for 3 mana, all of which will be 2/2s pretty quickly, none of whom are going to worry about sacrificing things. Like this is such a grindy build, and I think that was the point of cutting that Generous Visitor. Is you're not trying to get out as fast. You're just trying to establish a position and then snowball that advantage by shoveling tokens onto the battlefield and forcing them to deal with it. And then maybe they deal with it, and you just play Catildas left and right and force them to deal with it
Yeah.
twice. You know?
Yeah, I was going to say the Catilda, the Hallowed Hauntings all point to this strategy of being able to survive the 1-for-1 exchange that you often have to do with decks like Dimir Midrange, and being able to come out on top anyway after that exchange. So yeah, Selesnya value deck. I only expect the stock of this deck to go up as Wilds of Eldraine releases for obvious reasons. We've seen the spoilers. But what are you thinking about Selesnya Enchantress? Which direction do you think this build is going to go? A more aggressive or a more mid-rangey grind? What's the trend here for Selesnya Enchantress as we go into set release?
I mean, me personally, I'm gonna see if I can find a more aggressive version because I want Calyx to be busted, and I want to see if I can
Yeah.
break that archetype by doing it that way. But honestly, my guess is it ends up in the grind again because this deck does
Mm,
grind really hard, and it's going to get some cards that are going to allow that to go even further. And I,
yeah.
I can't wait to mess with it. There's so much to be said for this archetype. It's very unique and it's got a lot of room to maneuver on how you build it. We've already seen 3 different builds this over the past 12 weeks. I think we're going to
Mm.
see a few more once the new set drops. So be ready for it. And if you have it, congrats. It's still probably a relevant archetype once we add in wilds. So it was a good investment.
Yeah, I agree. Invest your wild cards accordingly.
Right.
All right, talk to us about the final tier 1 archetype, the one that we've kind of been mentioning via other decks, Dimir Midrange.
For multiple weeks, this archetype reigned supreme, but with the whole world gunning for it, we saw it falter at long last. Still, with a 5th place finish in the showcase and 4 spots in the top 8 of the MTGO Challenge this past weekend, we're not ready to push this down to tier 2. We are going to see a mixture of pilots pushing up to Big Shelly or over to Sword of Once and Future as they continue hedging bets against the mirror. But honestly, I'm going to be surprised if I see hedges that hard as we keep going now that these other archetypes are starting to come out of the woodwork. Because Sword of Once and Future, fantastic against Mono Black, fantastic against Dimir. Not so great when they play Wandering Emperor. Not so great when they have exile-based instant speed removal. I mean, can you imagine playing Sword of Once and Future against that Azorius Control list with laydown arms?
Yeah.
You're like, anyway, here's this creature, and I spent 5 mana to equip it. And they're like, excellent. And it dies for 1 mana. And now you get to do that again at some point. Have fun. Like, it just, you can only tilt so hard from the mirror before you have to acknowledge that there is diversification in this format. We talked about that last week, and what would hold Dimir in check is the diversity. And it has. It came out this last weekend, and Dimir didn't claim any of the top trophies. In my opinion, that's because the diversification. We saw that Esper not so Legends, I don't know, Esper mid build, and the diversification of threats there. As a Dimir player, that would be a fucking nightmare to try to pilot against, because you don't know which way the hits are coming from. Are you going to get hit with a Make Disappear? Are you going to get hit with an Edgar Charmed Groom next? Like, what the fuck you can't plan for it. That's the beauty of that list, and I love that.
Hell yeah. Yeah. Diverse deck that can answer multiple threats from multiple directions. Dimir mid-range, in my opinion. But to talk to me, sort of once in future, we've been going back and forth with other people off camera, on camera, regarding sort of once in future and whether this is main boardable or not. Talk to us about what archetypes and what meta share you're looking at. Say there's a tournament tomorrow. What meta share are we looking at where we want to play sort of once in future in the main and then maybe just in the sideboard? What is it good against?
I think if I'm going to see 25% meta share, a quarter of your matchups are going to be either Dimir or Mono Black, then sort of once in future makes a lot of sense, because you're going to play at least one, if not two rounds in a bigger tournament against it. And one copy in the main makes sense, one copy in the side makes sense for that. You're hedging slightly. It's not always going to be great, but it's also not a dead card. That said, having that second copy in the sideboard helps ensure you're going to see it for game 2 and 3 potentially. So I expect to see it there. I will say, I got super salty. I was playing in Mythic. I was rocking Mono Black with a sword in the main, and I played against an inspired Mono Red build that was playing Sword of Once in Future, and it was splashing black just so it could play Go for the Throats and Shelly's Edicts post board. Not even the main, just post board as a big middle finger. And I'm sitting there like, all right, I played Shieldred the Apocalypse. I'm gonna win against Mono Red, and they go, anyway, Go for the Throat. And I'm like, what the fuck? And then they just equipped their Monastery Swift Spear with a Sword of Once in Future, swung right through and killed my Evolved Sleeper, and I was out of a board completely. And they're just sitting there with a sword and a Monastery Swift Spear, and I can't touch it. I'm like, oh,
I guarantee you ran to the one person on ladder doing that.
Oh, it was inspired. I was so happy to see it and so frustrated at the time, because looking at it at the moment, I was like, damn it, all right, it's an inbred meta. I deserve this. But on the other hand, I'm like, really? And, the coup de grace is that they got to double lightning strike me with their sword.
Oh, my God. That's bad. You love to see these wild brews on ladder, though, and you'd love to see people actually utilizing them in Mythic. That's a bonus. Right. So speaking of brews, let's jump into the Brewers Corner. We've got 2 new brews today for you. And I'm going to begin with talking about Orzhov Scam. Now, I like to tell people about this build in Alchemy. I haven't seen it yet in Standard because it has a few more cards that you can play with. But, of course, if you're playing this in Standard, you have more power cards that you can utilize, including the 2 copies of Wandering Emperor, the 2 copies of Sheldred. But your main game plan here is that you're going to bring in these prototype creatures in the Angel, in the Flesh Gorger, and you're going to play them, as 3 drops, and then once your opponent tries to remove them, once they try to deal lethal in combat, however, you're going to use Undying Malice to bring them back as the full-fledged version of the card. So these are very cool cards you want to get out. Flesh Gorger can kind of win you the game if they don't respond to it. If they're below 7 life and they do respond to it, that's game over. So these are definitely some cards you want to flip. Wedding Announcement gives the deck some versatility as well in the 3-drop slot to mitigate and respond to that 1-for-1 kind of game plan that you might run into. So I dig it. I've always loved this kind of like Blink prototype kind of archetype. Darth Rictus, what do you think about this list?
It's not exactly where I think it needs to be. I started fucking with the numbers, I'm not going to lie. And there are pieces that I really like, and there are pieces that I don't. Honestly, the Shieldreds at the top probably don't deserve to be there. It should probably just be 2 more Wandering Emperor, because that allows us more of that army in a can feel, while also giving us, basically making us immune to Go for the Throat. Because if they want to go for the throat, a Tenacious Underdog, more power to you, homie. I don't care. And if you want to go for the throat tokens, again, more power to you. Don't care. But the reason I left the 2 Shieldreds in this build was because it is really funny to play Shieldred with a black up and they kill it, but not really because Undying Malice, and now it's a 5/6. Good luck. So I don't know. I
Yeah.
wanted like 2 more targets for Undying Malice, but I'm not sure that we needed them, and I'm just kind of back and forth. This build, it's interesting. If people are leaning hard on Go for the Throat to like catch them back up in a game, I feel like this build will just annihilate them. So we'll see. We'll see. It's interesting to me.
Yeah. We'll see. Let us know what you think of the build down there in the comments. Now, talk to us about this next one. Boros Blinky Soldiers. What's going on here?
So this is a submission by user Matt961. Thank you for sending it in, Matt.
Thank you, Matt.
I will say I messed with your build a little bit. I saw your initial build, and I noted that we could upgrade some of the lands and mess with some of the numbers. So this is my take on it, because I really like where you started with this Nahiri's Resolve. The idea that you get to do this with Mural, which means if you have this in play and you cast Mural, your opponent, once it's resolved, can't interact before you get to swing with your hasty Mural to give yourself a bunch of soldiers, and then you can just blink it right back out if you want. So it's kind of wild. It's got a lot of blink ability. This getting to blink is just going to net you cards every turn. And in the meantime, we managed to pair Baird with both Valiant Veteran, Guardian, and Coppercoat to give 3 different iterations to activate this, to just give us a steady stream of 1/1 soldiers. So I don't know if this is good or not. I've not played a game with it, but it looks like a hell of a lot of fun, and I'm going to mess with it at some point. So thank you, Matt961. Appreciate you submitting this to the Brewers Corner. And for everybody out there, if you have an idea, you got some spice you want to have showcased, ship it our way. We love it. We love it. We'll showcase it. I'm all about that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And we love Brewers here. We celebrate brewing outside the meta, just doing your thing and trying to see if you can break things. I love it. I love it. Give us more decks, submit more decks to us. Let us know in the comments and, what you're playing today. And that's the Brewers Corner. So comment below if you have any questions about the metagame that you would like answered. Darth Rictus, what are your final thoughts for this week?
My prediction for the weekend is we are going to see Azorius Control refine its list to push out Selesnya Enchantress with a couple extra copies of Farewell in the sideboard, and that we're going to see Esper Control follow suit. Now, Esper Refine is probably going to continue to gatekeep Dimir out with card advantage, causing the archetype, Dimir midrange, the archetype, to finally fall down to tier 2 before Wilds of Eldraine arrives to shake things up. So I would say get ready for the rise of Azorius and Esper this weekend, because I haven't seen a deck with red top 8 in a while.
Yeah, you could be right. And I think I'm going to go ahead and make a prediction beyond that, because I think you're actually right on that one. As we approach the final week here, before we get a sort of shift with the set release, I think you're correct. I think beyond the set release, though, I'm going to make a wild prediction here and say you can expect to see more creature-based decks, more aggro as we step into Wilds of Eldraine. I can already kind of see Selesnya Enchantments on the rise as a tier 1 status deck, and it's going to maintain that position. With the addition of new aggressive archetypes alongside it as well. I have questions. How effective will food tokens be? Are fairies going to be more than just an archetype unlimited? Is mono green back? Will decks like Gruul, Golgari, aggressive archetypes such as those make a return with the graveyard play and the creature-friendly strategies that mechanics like Adventure bring back to the table? These are questions I ask when I enter this specific set release. It's not really a full rotation, right? We're not going to get that yet. They've announced. But it does give me a similar vibe with so much excitement around all these new cards that have been spoiled recently and these new mechanics. I can tell you, I will be there. The rest of the MTG Rebellion Guild Mage crew will be there for you during early access. We're going to be playtesting and trying out as many new archetypes from this set release as we can. So look forward to the announcements regarding that. But don't miss it. Stay tuned for those announcements. And I'd just like to say that'll pretty much wrap things up here. But I'm thoroughly excited for this set release. I think there's a lot of opportunity to brew, a lot of opportunity to brew across different formats, not just standard. But let us know in the comments what you think, what you're going to be building week 1. And while you're down there, don't forget to like and subscribe. So that'll pretty much wrap things up here. From everyone at the Rebellion, don't forget to untap, upkeep,
Resist.